A wedding is supposed to be a promise of forever, a celebration of love sealed before family and friends. For Celeste, 7 months pregnant and radiant in white, it was the beginning of her perfect life with the man of her dreams. But what happens when the dream becomes a nightmare just hours before you say, "I do"? What happens when the man at the altar is hiding a secret so vile it could shatter not just one heart, but 2 families? This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of a woman who turned her deepest pain into a devastating reckoning, proving that hell hath no fury like a bride betrayed. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thorne family estate, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny celebratory diamonds. Celeste smoothed a hand over the gentle swell of her stomach, a serene smile gracing her lips. At 28, she was living a life that felt like a beautifully written script. 7 months pregnant with a child she already adored, and just 48 hours away from marrying Jack Thorne, the man who had not just captured her heart, but had seemingly built a fortress around it. Jack was everything a woman was taught to dream of. The heir to the Thorne fortune, a sprawling empire of boutique hotels and luxury real estate, he possessed a charisma that could disarm world leaders and a smile that had made Celeste feel like the only person in the world from their very first meeting. He was handsome in that classic old money way, sharp jaw, intelligent blue eyes, and hair the color of dark honey that he perpetually brushed back with an elegant hand. He'd pursued her with a gentle, unwavering determination that had felt like destiny. He didn't just love her, he celebrated her, encouraging her career as an art curator and listening with rapt attention as she spoke about Renaissance painters and Impressionist brushstrokes. Their love story was the stuff of modern fairy tales. A chance meeting at a gallery, opening a whirlwind romance that felt both thrillingly fast and profoundly right, and a proposal under the stars on the Amalfi Coast. When she'd found out she was pregnant, a few months later, Jack had wept with joy holding her, as if she were the most precious treasure he could ever possess. "A family," he had whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "You're giving me a family, Celeste. You're giving me everything." Now standing in the grand library of his family's ancestral home, she felt the truth of those words. The wedding was set to be the event of the year. Planners, florists, and caterers buzzed around the estate like diligent bees, all orchestrated by Jack's formidable mother, Genevieve Thorne. Genevieve was a woman carved from ice and ambition, her approval a rare commodity that Celeste had miraculously seemed to win. "You have a calming effect on him," Genevieve had told her once, her sharp eyes scanning Celeste's simple but elegant dress. It wasn't a compliment delivered with warmth, but rather a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of Celeste's utility. "Jack is passionate. He needs a steady anchor. You will be a good wife for him." Celeste chose to interpret it as a blessing. She knew she was marrying into a different world, a world of legacy and expectation, but she believed her love with Jack was strong enough to bridge any gap. Her cousin Serena certainly thought so. Serena, her maid of honor, had been her confidant since childhood. They were more like sisters, their bond forged through shared secrets and scraped knees. Serena had been her biggest cheerleader from the moment she met Jack. "He's perfect, Celeste. Absolutely perfect." Serena had gushed, her own bright eyes sparkling with excitement. "You two are like something out of a movie." Serena was staying at the estate with her, a comforting presence in the whirlwind of final preparations. She was helping Celeste address the last of the place cards, her laughter echoing off the leather-bound books that lined the library walls. "Can you believe it? In 2 days, you'll be Mrs. Thorne," Serena said, nudging her playfully. "Ready to be lady of the manor?" Celeste laughed, a genuine bubbling sound of pure happiness. "I'm just ready to be his wife. And a mum." She looked down at her belly again, feeling a soft flutter from within. "It's all happening so fast, but it feels so right." Yet even in this cocoon of perfection, a tiny dissonant note had sounded so faint she had barely registered it. The night before, during a small family dinner, Jack had been on his phone more than usual. When she'd leaned over to whisper something to him, he'd angled the screen away with a reflexive quickness that felt odd. "Just a last-minute fire at the new hotel site in Dubai," he'd explained, flashing her that reassuring smile. "Don't you worry your beautiful head about it. I'm handling it." And she hadn't. Why would she? He was Jack. He handled everything. He was her rock, her future, the father of her child. The thought of doubting him felt like a betrayal in itself. She dismissed the flicker of unease as pre-wedding jitters, a common affliction of brides-to-be. Later that evening, as she was heading to her room, she overheard a snippet of conversation between Jack and his mother in the hallway. Genevieve's voice was a low, insistent murmur. "You must be more careful, Jack, with so much at stake." "Mother, it's under control," Jack had replied, his tone clipped and impatient. "Everything is perfectly under control. Don't worry about it." They had stopped talking the moment they saw her. Genevieve had given her a thin, polite smile, while Jack had immediately wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "Just discussing the seating chart for the 10th time," he'd said smoothly. "My mother is convinced your liberal artist friends will start a political debate with my conservative uncle." It was a plausible explanation, and he'd been so warm, so attentive, that she'd forgotten the strangeness of his mother's words. She had leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of his cologne, and letting the last of her unease dissolve. Standing now in the sun-drenched library, with Serena happily sorting ribbons beside her, the memory felt distant and insignificant. It was a tiny crack in a flawless diamond, invisible to the naked eye. Her life was perfect. Her love was real. In 48 hours, her forever would begin. She had no reason to believe otherwise. The day before the wedding dawned bright and clear, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. A good omen, everyone kept saying. The estate was a hive of activity, the air thick with the scent of lilies and roses. Celeste spent the morning with the wedding planner, finalizing details, and the afternoon at a blissfully relaxing spa session with Serena and the other bridesmaids. Everything was proceeding with flawless precision, just as Genevieve Thorne demanded. Jack was supposed to be at the golf club with his father and groomsmen, a final day of bachelorhood before committing to his new life. He was due back in the early evening for the rehearsal dinner. Celeste, feeling a wave of fatigue from the day's excitement, decided to retreat to the suite she was staying in for a quiet hour before she needed to get ready. The suite was breathtaking, a sprawling space with silk wallpaper and antique furniture that overlooked the manicured gardens. Jack's things were mingled with hers. A stray tie draped over a chair, his leather briefcase on the desk. A sense of domesticity was already settling in, and it filled her with a warm, contented glow. She slipped off her shoes and was about to lie down when she noticed his work laptop sitting open on the desk. He was usually so meticulous about closing it. Beside it lay his personal phone face up. As she walked past the screen, lit up with a notification. It was a simple message preview from a name she didn't recognize, Chloe. Chloe. Can't wait for the real honeymoon. This weekend is just for show, right? Celeste stopped dead, her heart giving a painful lurch. She stared at the screen, the words swimming before her eyes. The real honeymoon. The winking emoji seemed to mock her from the screen. It had to be a mistake, a joke. Maybe Chloe was a friend of his, someone with a twisted sense of humor. Jack had plenty of those. Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. It was locked, of course. She tried his birthday. Nothing. Their anniversary. Nothing. A knot of pure cold dread began to form in the pit of her stomach, so intense it was hard to breathe. This was insane. She was being paranoid. It was just pre-wedding jitters magnified 1,000 times. She walked away from the desk, pacing the length of the opulent room. She tried to rationalize it. Jack was a handsome, wealthy man. Of course, women threw themselves at him. This Chloe was probably some desperate ex who couldn't let go. Jack loved her. He was marrying her. He was having a baby with her. But the casual, confident tone of the message clawed at her. This weekend is just for show, right? It implied a shared secret, a deep-seated conspiracy she was not a part of. The fortress around her heart began to crumble, brick by painful brick. She found herself back at the desk, her eyes drawn to his laptop. He'd left his email open. Her conscience screamed at her not to look, that this was a violation of trust, a point of no return. But the sickening fear churning inside her was stronger. With a shaking finger, she clicked on his inbox. There was nothing incriminating on the first page. Work emails, messages from his groomsmen, a confirmation for their honeymoon flight to the Maldives. She was about to close it, flooded with a mix of relief and shame, when she saw a folder on the sidebar labeled Projects. It was a generic name, but something compelled her to click it. Inside there was another folder, Santorini Villa. Her brow furrowed. They hadn't discussed a villa in Santorini. She clicked again. The folder contained a reservation confirmation and a string of emails. Not with a realtor, but with a woman named Chloe Sterling. The reservation was for a private, secluded villa for 2 weeks, starting the Monday after their wedding. Celeste's blood ran cold as she read the email chain. The messages were flirtatious, intimate. Jack's words were laced with a passion and an impatience that made her stomach heave. He spoke of escaping, of being free, of celebrating their real beginning. Chloe, are you sure you can get away so soon after the event, Jack? Don't worry about that. It's all part of the plan. I'll be there. We'll finally have the time we deserve. Mykonos was just the appetizer. Mykonos, a business trip he'd taken 2 months ago. He'd brought her back a beautiful silk scarf, telling her how much he'd missed her the entire time. The room started to spin. Celeste gripped the back of the chair, her knuckles white. This was not a flirtation. This was a plan. A full-blown affair, with its own timeline, its own destinations, its own future. This weekend is just for show. The message on his phone now made perfect, horrifying sense. Just then she heard the suite door open. Jack walked in looking relaxed and happy, his cheeks flushed from the sun. He was unbuttoning his polo shirt when he saw her standing at the desk, her face as pale as a ghost. His smile faltered. "Celeste, darling, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." He moved towards her, his expression shifting to one of concern. She couldn't speak. She could only point a trembling finger at the laptop screen. His eyes followed her finger, and for a fraction of a second, she saw it, a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. It was there and gone in an instant, replaced by a look of confusion. He walked over and peered at the screen. "The Santorini villa." "Oh, that," he said, letting out a short, dismissive laugh. "Darling, you scared me. That's a surprise for you." Celeste stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "A surprise?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Of course," he said, his voice a smooth, reassuring balm. He shut the laptop firmly. "It was going to be my wedding gift. A second honeymoon, just for us after the baby is born, and we're settled. I wanted it to be a complete secret." He stepped closer and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Chloe is just the concierge arranging it. You know how these high-end services are. They get a little overly familiar in their emails." He was so convincing. His touch was so gentle, his eyes so sincere. For a moment, she desperately wanted to believe him. The sheer relief of it would be overwhelming. She wanted to fall into his arms and let him tell her it was all a misunderstanding. "But the messages," she stammered. "The way you two were talking, and the text on your phone." His expression hardened slightly. "Celeste, are you saying you went through my private phone and my laptop?" The question was soft, but the undertone of disappointment was sharp. "Darling, I know you're stressed with the wedding and the pregnancy, but this is not like you. To doubt me like this the day before we commit our lives to each other." He was turning it around. He was making her the one at fault. Gaslighting. The clinical term popped into her head, and the clarity of it was like a slap in the face. "I trusted you, Jack," he continued, his voice laced with hurt. "I thought we trusted each other. For you to invent this sordid fantasy about me and a concierge because of a few poorly worded emails. It's insulting, Celeste. It truly is." He looked so genuinely wounded that a sliver of doubt crept back in. Was she overreacting? Was the stress and hormonal flux of pregnancy making her paranoid? He saw her hesitation and pressed his advantage, pulling her into an embrace. "Let's forget this ever happened," he murmured into her hair. "It's our wedding tomorrow. Let's focus on that, on us, on our baby." He held her tight, but for the first time his arms didn't feel like a fortress. They felt like a cage. She allowed him to hold her body rigid, with a tension that wouldn't dissipate. She let him soothe her with empty words and practiced lies. But as she stood there, wrapped in the arms of the man she was supposed to marry, she knew with a bone-deep certainty that nothing he had said was true. The crack was no longer invisible. It had splintered, running deep and threatening to shatter everything she had believed in, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. The rehearsal dinner was an exercise in surreal torture. Celeste sat beside Jack, a fixed, brittle smile on her face, feeling as though she were watching a play of her own life from a great distance. She listened to the toasts, the laughter, the excited chatter about the next day's festivities, and every joyful sound was a grating insult to the screaming chaos in her mind. Jack was the perfect fiancé, a role he played with masterful ease. He kept his arm draped around the back of her chair, squeezed her hand under the table, and leaned in to whisper loving words that now sounded like venom. He was performing for his family, for their friends, and most of all, for her. He thought he had successfully quelled her suspicions that his web of lies had held firm. He believed she was back in her box, the docile, trusting bride. He was wrong. Every loving look he gave her now felt like a taunt. Every time he mentioned our future, she had to fight the urge to scream. She watched him interact with his family and friends, this charming, beloved man, and saw only a stranger, a skilled actor who had fooled everyone, including her. Her gaze kept drifting across the table to Serena. Her cousin was laughing at something one of the groomsmen said, her face alight with a carefree joy that made Celeste's stomach clench. How could she sit there so happy and relaxed, knowing what she knew? Or was it possible Serena was innocent? The thought was a desperate lifeline. Maybe Chloe was the only other woman. It was a horrifying thought, but it was containable. The betrayal of her fiancé was one thing. The betrayal of her sister in spirit was another. After the dinner concluded, as guests began to mingle, Celeste excused herself, claiming a headache. She needed to be alone. She needed to know the whole truth, no matter how ugly. Jack's explanation about the concierge was laughably thin, and the name Chloe Sterling was now seared into her brain. Back in the suite, she grabbed her own laptop. The lie he'd told her had one fatal flaw. It was too specific. A high-end concierge service, a villa in Santorini, Mykonos. These were details she could use. Her hands shook as she typed Chloe Sterling Luxury Concierge into the search bar. The results were immediate. Chloe Sterling wasn't a concierge. She was a well-known social media influencer, a model whose feed was a curated gallery of exotic locations, designer clothes and five-star hotels. Her profile was public. Celeste's heart pounded against her ribs as she clicked on the page. The pictures were a testament to a life of sponsored luxury. Chloe in Paris, Chloe in Bali, Chloe in Dubai. And then 2 months ago, a series of posts from Mykonos. Celeste's breath hitched. She scrolled frantically through the photos. Chloe posing on a yacht, Chloe at a beach club, Chloe raising a champagne glass against a sunset. In the reflection of her oversized sunglasses in one of the photos, Celeste could just make out the distorted figure of the man taking the picture. He was wearing the same linen shirt Jack had worn in the photos he'd sent her from his business trip. It was damning, but it wasn't definitive proof. She kept scrolling, her blood turning to ice. A few weeks back, a picture of Chloe holding a large bouquet of peonies, Celeste's favorite flower. The caption read, "He just gets me. Even when he's away, he knows how to make me smile." At luckiest girl. Celeste felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the edge of the desk. Jack had sent her the exact same bouquet for her birthday last month. Still, she needed more. She needed something that connected this woman directly to the charade of her own life. She scrolled further, going back months, looking for a crack, a slip-up. And then she found it. It was a group photo posted about 6 months ago. A birthday party at a trendy New York club. Chloe was in the center, beaming, surrounded by friends. And standing right behind her, with one arm casually draped over the back of Chloe's chair and the other holding a drink, was Jack. He was smiling, looking completely at ease. But it wasn't Jack's presence that made Celeste's world collapse. It was the other person in the photo, standing on Chloe's other side, laughing as if she didn't have a care in the world. It was Serena. The air left Celeste's lungs in a painful rush. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. Serena. Her Serena. Her maid of honor, her confidant, her cousin, who had held her hand through every high and low of her life. She was friends with Jack's mistress. No, it was worse than that. The way Serena was looking at Chloe, the easy camaraderie in their posture. This wasn't a casual acquaintance. They were close. Suddenly, 100 little moments snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. Serena always defending Jack if Celeste expressed the slightest doubt. Serena encouraging Celeste to give him his space when he went on his frequent business trips. Serena just last week borrowing Celeste's laptop for an hour, claiming hers had crashed. Had she been deleting things, covering tracks, Celeste felt a cold fury begin to burn through the shock. They hadn't just betrayed her. They had been laughing at her. The two people she trusted most in the world had been partners in a grand, cruel deception. She needed the final irrefutable piece of the puzzle. An idea cold and clinical formed in her mind. Serena's password for her social media was the name of her childhood dog, a name Celeste knew as well as her own. With trembling fingers, she logged out of her account and typed in Serena's details. She hesitated for a moment, then clicked Login. She was in. She went straight to the private messages. There it was, a message thread with Chloe S. Her heart hammered as she opened it, and the world fell away. It was all there. Months and months of conversations. They talked about Jack referring to him as Jay. They talked about Celeste, but they didn't use her name. They called her the Project, or the Anchor. Serena, you have to see the ring he got the Project. It's disgustingly huge. She actually cried. Chloe, sooner this is over, the better. Is he still on track with the plan? Serena, of course. He's got her completely fooled. And the baby thing just makes it easier. Locks in the family's support. Genevieve would never let him back out now. He says after the wedding, he'll start the process. A quick marriage, an amicable split after a year, and he gets control of his trust fund without any strings attached. And you get him, Chloe, and she gets a nice little settlement and a baby. Everyone wins. Well, almost everyone. Celeste stopped reading, a strangled sob escaping her lips. It wasn't just an affair. Her entire relationship, her marriage, her child. It was all a sham, a business transaction. Jack needed to be married to unlock the full inheritance his grandfather had left him, an ironclad clause to ensure the Thorne heir was a stable family man. She wasn't his anchor of love. She was his anchor for a trust fund. The pregnancy hadn't been a joyous surprise. It had been a strategic move to solidify his position. She scrolled down and saw the final soul-crushing message sent just that afternoon while they were at the spa. A photo. It was a selfie of Serena and Chloe taken years ago laughing together on a beach. Underneath, Serena had written, "Serena soon, my friend." The performance is almost over. Tomorrow she plays the bride. Then the real show begins. The betrayal was so complete, so monstrous, that it transcended pain and settled into something else entirely. Something cold, hard, and terrifyingly calm. The tears stopped. The shaking ceased. The woman who had been weeping over a broken heart was gone. In her place was someone else, forged in the fires of an unimaginable deception. They thought she was a pawn in their game. They were about to find out she was the one who was going to burn the whole board down. The grief that should have shattered her did not come. There was no a collapse into a weeping heap on the floor, no frantic call to her parents to cancel everything. The pain was there, a vast black ocean inside her. But it was eerily still. Over the surface of that ocean, a storm was gathering, a silent, calculated fury that was colder and more dangerous than any screaming match could ever be. Celeste closed the laptop, the click of the lid echoing in the silent room like a gavel falling. The performance was almost over. Serena was right about that. But it wouldn't be Celeste playing the part of the fool. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes dark with a chilling resolve. The soft, romantic bride-to-be had been hollowed out, and in her place stood a queen, planning a war. They had conspired to humiliate her in secret, to use her and her unborn child as props in their sordid play. A quiet annulment or a cancelled wedding wouldn't suffice. That would allow them to control the narrative to paint her as unstable, hysterical, a jilted lover who couldn't handle the truth. No, the truth deserved an audience. Their humiliation needed to be as public and spectacular as the wedding they had so meticulously planned. She sat down at the ornate desk, took a deep breath and began to plan. Her mind, once filled with thoughts of floral arrangements and honeymoon destinations, was now a razor-sharp instrument of vengeance. Her first call was not to her family, but to an old friend from college, a man named Ben Carter. Ben was a tech genius, a cybersecurity expert who had once jokingly told her he could hack into the Pentagon if he was bored enough. He owed her a favor after she'd helped his sister land a coveted internship at her gallery. "Ben," she said, her voice steady and devoid of emotion, "I need your help. It's an emergency and it's time-sensitive, and it requires absolute discretion." She explained the situation in clipped, precise sentences, laying out the deception without a single tear. She could hear Ben's stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Celeste, my God," he finally breathed. "What do you need? I have screenshots of everything," she said, her voice like ice. "Text messages, social media conversations, photos. I need them compiled into a presentation, a slideshow, and I need it to play on a loop on a big screen. Can you do that? A big screen. At your wedding?" Ben asked, the shock in his voice turning to dawning comprehension. "Oh, you are not messing around. The wedding venue has 3 large projection screens they use for slideshows of the happy couple. They're connected to a central AV system. I need you to get remote access, and I need you to be on standby tomorrow at precisely 12:30 p.m. When I give the signal, you press play. Consider it done." Ben said, a note of grim admiration in his voice. "I'll need you to send me the files securely. I'll handle the rest. They won't know what hit them." Her next step was to ensure her own escape. She couldn't stay and face the fallout, the questions, the pitying looks. She needed a clean break. She booked a one-way ticket to Florence, Italy, under her maiden name for a flight leaving at 4 p.m. the next day. Florence was where her grandmother had been born, a place she had always dreamed of visiting. It would be the birthplace of her new life. She packed a small bag with essentials, her passport, and a folder containing printouts of all her evidence, just in case. She hid the bag in the back of the large closet. Finally, she had to prepare herself for the performance of a lifetime. She had to get through the next 18 hours without betraying a hint of the inferno raging within her. She splashed her face with cold water, practiced her smile in the mirror until it looked less like a grimace, and went to find Serena. She found her in her room, scrolling through her phone, a picture of innocence. "There you are," Serena said, looking up with a bright smile. "Feeling better, I was getting worried." "Much better," Celeste replied, her voice smooth as silk. "I think I was just overwhelmed. All this excitement. It's a lot." She sat on the edge of Serena's bed, forcing herself to play the part. She asked about the bachelorette party gossip about what shoes Serena was planning to wear. Every word was a lie, every smile a carefully crafted mask. It was sickeningly easy. Serena, so confident in her deception, saw nothing but the naive, lovesick cousin she thought she knew so well. Later, Jack came to her room, bearing a cup of chamomile tea. He was in his finest form, the caring, attentive fiancé. "Feeling settled, my love?" he asked, stroking her hair as she sat on the bed. "I am so sorry if I was harsh earlier. I was just so shocked that you could even think those things. I love you, Celeste. Only you." He leaned in to kiss her, and it took every ounce of her self-control not to recoil. She forced herself to kiss him back, to put a hand on his cheek and murmur, "I know. I love you too. I was being silly." He smiled, satisfied. The puppet was back on her strings. He had no idea the strings had been cut, and the puppet was now holding a pair of shears. As she lay in bed that night, feigning sleep, she felt a profound sense of calm. The betrayal had carved a hole in her, but it had also filled her with an unshakable purpose. They thought they were in control. They thought they were the directors of this show. But she was the one who would be bringing down the final curtain. Tomorrow was her wedding day, and it would be a day that none of them would ever forget. The morning of the wedding was a masterpiece of organized chaos. Hairstylists, makeup artists, and photographers swirled around Celeste's suite, transforming her into the picture-perfect bride. Genevieve Thorne swept in and out, issuing crisp commands and inspecting every detail with an eagle eye. Through it all, Celeste remained a tranquil island in the center of the storm. Her calm was so profound that people commented on it. "You're the most serene bride I've ever seen," the makeup artist remarked, dusting a soft shimmer onto her eyelids. "She's just so ready," Serena added, fluffing the train of Celeste's couture gown. "Aren't you, cousin, not a nerve in sight?" Celeste met Serena's gaze in the mirror, offering a small, enigmatic smile. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." She allowed them to dress her, to place the delicate veil in her hair, to hand her the bouquet of white peonies, the same flowers from Chloe's Instagram post. Holding them didn't trigger pain. It fueled her resolve. Each petal was a reminder of the lies, a justification for the beautiful, terrible thing she was about to do. Her father arrived to walk her down the aisle, his eyes misting over with pride. "You look like an angel, sweetheart," he whispered, tucking her arm into his. As they stood at the back of the magnificent old church, waiting for the music to begin, her father squeezed her hand. "Are you happy, Celeste?" She looked at him, her kind, honest father who deserved so much better than the deceit he was about to witness. "I'm about to be dad," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm about to be." Then the familiar strains of the wedding march began. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing the scene she had both dreamed of and now dreaded. The church was filled to capacity, a sea of expectant faces turned towards her. The aisle, lined with hundreds of candles and cascading white orchids, seemed to stretch for miles, and at the end of it, waiting at the altar, stood Jack. He looked impossibly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo. When his eyes met hers, he broke into a radiant smile, a look of pure adoration that was so flawlessly executed it could have won an award. Beside him stood his groomsmen, and on the other side her bridesmaids, with Serena at the front, looking angelic in her pale blush gown. Every step she took down that aisle was a deliberate act of war. The gentle rustle of her dress was a battle cry. The serene expression on her face was her armor. She walked past rows of Jack's powerful business associates, his blue-blooded relatives, and her own beloved family and friends. They were all here to witness a union, and a union they would get not of two lovers, but of truth and consequence. She focused on Jack's face. She saw the smug confidence in his eyes, the proprietary pride of a man who believed he had won at everything. He was looking at his beautiful pregnant bride, the final piece in his meticulously constructed puzzle. He saw his trust fund, his freedom, his future with another woman, all walking towards him in a halo of white silk and lace. He had no idea he was looking at his own destruction. When she reached the altar, her father placed her hand in Jack's. Jack's grip was warm and firm. He leaned in his breath, ghosting her ear. "You've never looked more beautiful," he whispered, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "I am the luckiest man in the world." "You have no idea," she whispered back, her voice so low only he could hear it. He gave a slight frown, a flicker of confusion, but there was no time to question it. The officiant, a kind-faced man, with a gentle voice, began the ceremony. The words washed over Celeste in a meaningless drone. She tuned out the readings, the homilies about love, trust, and fidelity. Her heart was beating a steady, rhythmic drum, a countdown to the moment of detonation. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, felt the warmth of the candlelight on her skin. The air was thick with anticipation, but only she knew what they were truly waiting for. Finally, the officiant reached the pivotal moment. "And now we come to the vows," he said, smiling benevolently at them both. "The sacred promises that will bind you together." He turned to Jack. Jack cleared his throat. His eyes locked on Celeste, and began to recite the vows he had written, filled with eloquent promises of eternal love and unwavering support. Then it was her turn. The officiant smiled at her. "Celeste, would you like to share your vows?" A hush fell over the church. This was it. She took a half-step forward. She felt a small vibration in the discreet clutch bag. She held a text from Ben. "System ready. Say the word." She looked directly into Jack's eyes, the eyes of the man who had shattered her world. She took a deep, steadying breath and began to speak. "Jack!" Celeste began, her voice ringing out with perfect clarity in the cavernous, silent church. It was a voice filled not with the tremor of bridal nerves, but with the cold, hard weight of authority. "I remember the first time you told me you loved me. We were in that little Italian restaurant downtown, and you said you knew from the moment you saw me that I was the one you wanted to build a life with. You promised me honesty. You promised me loyalty. And you promised me a future." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Jack's smile was unwavering, his eyes glistening with what appeared to be genuine emotion. He thought this was her heartfelt preamble, the romantic opening to her declaration of eternal love. The guests leaned forward, captivated. Serena dabbed at her eye with a tissue, a perfect portrait of a moved maid of honor. "I believed in those promises." Celeste continued, her tone beginning to shift, a subtle edge of steel creeping into her voice. "I believed in the life we were building, the family we were starting." She placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture that drew a collective soft sigh from the pews. "But I've learned recently that promises can be meticulously crafted lies, and our future can have a very different meaning depending on who you're talking to." A murmur of confusion rippled through the guests. Jack's smile tightened at the edges. His eyes darted from Celeste to his mother Genevieve, who was now sitting ramrod straight, her face a mask of sudden tension. So today, standing here in front of everyone you care about, I want to make some new vows," Celeste declared, her voice rising in power. "My first vow is to honesty. The kind of honesty you so beautifully pretended to value." She turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the audience before landing with surgical precision on Serena. "For example, I believe a maid of honor, a cousin, a sister, should be honest. She shouldn't, for instance, be best friends with her cousin's fiancé's mistress." A collective gasp swept through the church. Serena's face went white, her jaw dropping in horrified disbelief. Jack took a half step toward Celeste, his hand reaching for her arm. "Celeste, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice a furious whisper. Celeste pulled her arm away, her eyes flashing with fire. "I'm not finished," she snapped before turning her attention back to the stunned crowd. "But why stop there? My second vow is to loyalty. A husband should be loyal. He shouldn't be planning a real honeymoon in Santorini with a model named Chloe Sterling while his pregnant fiancée plans their wedding." She took out her phone. A single word sent to Ben. "Now." In that instant, the 3 large screens placed strategically around the church, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of their initials, flickered to life. The first image to appear was the screenshot of the text message from Chloe. "Can't wait for the real honeymoon. This weekend is just for show." Right. Chaos erupted. People were standing up, craning their necks, pulling out their phones. Jack stared at the screens, his face a contorted mask of rage and panic. "Turn that off! Somebody turn that off!" he roared, but no one knew how. The slideshow continued a brutal, undeniable narrative of his deceit. The next image was the group photo from the New York club, Jack, Chloe, and Serena all smiling together. Then came the damning social media messages between the 2 women. The screen filled with their cruel words magnified for all to see. "Serena, you have to see the ring he got the project. It's disgustingly huge." Chloe, "Is he still on track with the plan?" Serena, "He's got her completely fooled, and the baby thing just makes it easier, locks in the family's support." Celeste's voice cut through the pandemonium like a shard of glass. "It seems I wasn't a fiancé," she announced, her voice trembling with rage, but never breaking. "I was the project. My baby, our child, wasn't a blessing. It was a strategic move to unlock a trust fund." All eyes were now on Jack and his parents. Arthur Thorne, his father, looked apoplectic, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Genevieve looked as though she had been turned to stone, her icy composure finally shattering into a million pieces of public shame. Serena had crumpled, sobbing hysterically, while her own parents stared at her with expressions of pure horror. But Celeste wasn't finished. The final image appeared on the screen, the selfie Serena had sent to Chloe just yesterday. The 2 of them on a beach with the caption, "Soon, my friend." The performance is almost over. Tomorrow, she plays the bride. Then the real show begins. Celeste looked directly at Jack, whose face was now ashen. "So my final vow is this, Jack," she said, her voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper that still carried to every corner of the church. "I vow to never see you again. I vow to raise this child, my child, far away from the poison of your family's greed and deceit. I vow to be the strong, honest, and loyal mother that this baby deserves, everything you are not and never will be." She took the magnificent, disgustingly huge engagement ring from her finger. She didn't throw it. She walked the final few steps to the altar and placed it gently on the velvet cushion where their wedding bands were supposed to go. "The performance," she said, her voice clear and final, "is over." Without another glance at the man she had almost married or the cousin who had betrayed her, she turned her back on the altar. She lifted her head high, and with the whole world watching, she began her walk back down the aisle. This time, she wasn't walking towards a lie. She was walking towards her life. The walk back down the aisle was the longest and most liberating journey of Celeste's life. The cacophony of the ruined ceremony, the shouts, the sobbing, the furious whispers was the soundtrack to her emancipation. She didn't look at a single face. Her gaze was fixed on the great oak doors at the end of the aisle, the portal to her new world. The guests parted for her like a river, cleaving around a stone, their faces a mixture of shock pity and stunned admiration. She was a vision in white, not a bride, but a warrior, leaving a battlefield of her own, making the train of her dress, sweeping away the ashes of her old life. As she reached the doors, she heard Jack's voice roar with fury, bellowing her name. "Celeste! You will not do this! You will not humiliate me!" She didn't turn. She didn't slow down. She pushed the doors open and stepped out into the brilliant sunshine, taking her first breath as a free woman. The air had never tasted so sweet. A car she had prearranged, a discreet black sedan, was waiting at the curb precisely as planned. The driver, a professional she had hired for his discretion, opened the door for her without a word. As she slid into the cool leather interior, she could hear the commotion spilling out from the church behind her. The last thing she saw before the car pulled away was her father emerging from the church, his face a storm of confusion and anger looking for her. She sent him a quick text. "Dad, I am safe. I am okay. I will explain everything. Please just trust me." Inside the church, the scene had devolved into utter chaos. The Thorne and Miller families were on the verge of open warfare. Arthur Thorne was roaring at a shell-shocked Serena, whose parents were trying to shield her, while simultaneously demanding an explanation. Genevieve Thorne, her carefully constructed world in ruins, had her sights set on her son. Her voice, usually so controlled, was sharp with fury. "How could you have been so stupid, Jack?" She seethed, her voice low and venomous, so only he could hear. "I warned you to be careful. I told you to end it." Jack, cornered and publicly castrated, turned his rage on the only person left he could blame. "You knew about this," he snarled at his mother. "You knew, and you let this happen." The accusation hung in the air, another layer of deceit exposed for the guests still lingering to hear. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. News of the dramatic wedding that wasn't spread through their elite social circle like wildfire, fueled by 100 smartphone videos. The carefully guarded reputation of the Thorne family was in tatters. Several of Arthur Thorne's key business partners, men who valued integrity and stability above all else, were in the pews and witnessed the entire spectacle. The instability that Jack's grandfather had feared had just played out on the grandest stage possible. The trust fund, the very prize for which he had orchestrated this entire sham, was now in jeopardy, its clauses likely to be contested by fuming board members. By the time Celeste's plane was taking off bound for Florence, her old life was already being dismantled. Her phone buzzed with an avalanche of messages from her shocked and worried parents, from friends offering support, and a string of increasingly desperate, then furious, then pleading texts from Jack. She read none of them. She simply turned the device off and dropped it into her purse. She landed in Florence as the sun was setting, painting the sky over the Arno River in hues of pink and orange. She checked into a small, charming hotel she had booked in the Oltrarno district, a place known for its artisans and quiet streets. Her room had a small balcony overlooking a hidden courtyard. That night, she didn't cry. She sat on the balcony, breathing in the foreign air, a hand resting protectively on her belly. She felt a profound sense of peace. She had lost a fiancé, a cousin, and the life she thought she wanted, but she had found something far more valuable herself. She had discovered a core of strength she never knew she possessed. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. In the weeks that followed, Celeste built a new quiet life. She called her parents and through tears and patient explanations told them the whole story. Their anger at Jack was eclipsed only by their fierce pride in her. They became her staunchest allies, handling the legal mess back home and creating a buffer so she wouldn't have to engage with the Thorns. She explored Florence on foot, visiting the Uffizi Gallery and the Pitti Palace not as a curator, but as a woman rediscovering her own passion. She found a small apartment, started taking Italian lessons, and made friends with the local shopkeepers. She was no longer Jack Thorne's fiancée, or the project. She was just Celeste, a woman preparing to be a mother. Months later, her son Leo was born in a peaceful hospital in Florence, with her own mother by her side. Holding him for the first time, Celeste felt a love so pure and powerful it eclipsed any lingering shadows of betrayal. He was her future. He was her victory. One day, while Leo slept in his stroller in a sun-dappled piazza, she received an email from an old friend back home. It was a link to a Society News article. The headline read, "Thorne Empire in Turmoil. Jack Thorne disinherited engagement to influencer. Chloe Sterling implodes amidst scandal." The article detailed how, in the wake of the wedding disaster, the Thorne Family Trust Board had indeed invoked the morality clause, stripping Jack of his primary inheritance. His relationship with Chloe had disintegrated under the pressure and public scrutiny. He had lost everything he had schemed to gain. Serena, shunned by family and friends, had reportedly moved away to start over her reputation in tatters. Celeste read the words without triumph, but with a quiet sense of justice. She closed the browser. Their fate was no longer her concern. She looked at her beautiful son, sleeping soundly under the Tuscan sun, and smiled. Her revenge wasn't the explosion she had set off in the church. Her true revenge was this: her peace, her freedom, and the beautiful new life she was building, promise by promise for herself and her child. Celeste's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest souls. She walked into that church a bride, but walked out a hero of her own story. Her revenge wasn't just about exposing a lie. It was about reclaiming her truth and building a new future on her own terms for herself and for her child. She proved that you can't build a life on a foundation of deceit, because eventually the walls will come crashing down in the most spectacular way. What did you think of Celeste's incredible act of courage? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of strength and justice, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life stories. Thank you for listening. The air on Calavigny Island tasted of salt and betrayal. One moment, Hayley Devereaux was the pregnant, adored wife of a tech billionaire. The next she was a spectacle of public humiliation. Under the glittering lights of his lavish party, her husband, Sebastian, didn't just end their marriage. He detonated it. With his mistress clinging to his arm, he publicly renounced Haley and the child she carried, leaving her stranded on his private paradise as a tropical storm gathered on the horizon. He thought he had erased her, but he made one fatal mistake. He left her alive. The journey to Calivigny Island began not with the gentle hum of the Gulf Stream G750, but with the subtle, chilling click of a platinum lighter. Sebastian Devereaux lit his Cuban cigar, the cherry glowing like a malevolent eye in the jet's dim cabin. He didn't offer one to his associates, and he didn't look at his wife, Haley, who sat across from him, her hands resting protectively on the swell of her 5-month pregnancy. "It has to be perfect, Jenna," he said, his voice a low baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors into handing over fortunes. The smoke he exhaled coiled towards the ceiling. "This party isn't just a party. It's a statement. It's the culmination of the Ethelred acquisition. Everyone who is anyone will be there. We need to project unassailable strength." Haley managed a small smile. "Everything you do is perfect, Seb." It was the answer he expected, the one she had learned to give. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition of success, and she was its most beautiful, most serene installation. They had met 3 years prior at a Sotheby's auction. She was a junior art consultant, advising a client on a minor Degas sculpture. He wasn't bidding. He was buying the auction house. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, with a passion that felt alien in his world of algorithms and market capitalizations. For Haley, a woman raised by a university professor and a librarian in a quiet corner of Connecticut, Sebastian was a force of nature. His ambition was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. He'd showered her with a life ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a villa in Lake Como, and a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He loved her, she believed, for being his anchor, his peace in a world of cutthroat competition. But the gilded cage, no matter how opulent, was still a cage. Her opinions on art were now used to decorate his corporate lobbies. Her friends with their normal jobs and mortgages were politely phased out in favor of his circle of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech titans. He had even chosen the dress she was to wear tonight, a flowing seafoam green gown by a designer she'd never heard of. One that was meant to showcase her pregnancy in the most elegant, non-threatening way possible. "The Beaumonts are arriving just after us." Sebastian continued scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. "Blake Beaumont is a potential board member for the new conglomerate. His wife, Victoria. She can be a bit much, but she's influential. Be charming to her." Haley's smile tightened. Victoria Beaumont, a woman sculpted from marble and disdain, who looked at Haley as if she were a charming but ultimately temporary pet. Victoria was from Sebastian's world, old money, predatory ambition, and a shared history that was often hinted at but never clarified. The jet began its descent, breaking through a layer of pillowy clouds to reveal a turquoise expanse dotted with emerald islands. In the center, like a jewel, was Calivigny. It was Sebastian's ultimate status symbol, an 80-acre private island in the Grenadines that he'd purchased for an obscene sum. He'd spent 2 years and $100 million transforming it into his personal fiefdom, a paradise of Balinese-style villas, private beaches, and manicured jungle paths. As the plane touched down on the private airstrip, The cabin door opened to a wall of humid, fragrant air. A fleet of custom golf carts waited to whisk them to the main residence, a sprawling architectural masterpiece named The Overlook. Staff in crisp white uniforms lined the path, their heads bowed. It was a royal welcome. "Remember, Jenna?" Sebastian murmured, his hand on the small of her back, his touch feeling more like a positioning than a caress. Flawless. "Tonight we are untouchable." She nodded the baby inside her, giving a gentle kick a secret reassurance. She walked beside her husband into the heart of the magnificent home. The sound of a string quartet already drifting from the grand terrace. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes. Everything was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was, by all accounts, perfect. But as a grey bank of clouds began to mass on the distant horizon, Haley felt a shiver of unease, a premonition as dark and foreboding as the coming storm. The perfect world Sebastian had built felt impossibly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a single, malicious puff of wind. She was about to find out that the wind was already in the room, and it was wearing Victoria Beaumont's smile. The party was an exercise in calculated excess. An oyster bar featured mollusks flown in from 5 different countries. A vodka luge carved from a single block of ice into a replica of Sebastian's corporate logo was the centerpiece of the main bar. Tech billionaires mingled with European aristocrats and supermodels, laughed with grizzled hedge fund managers. Haley played her part, a gracious hostess, floating through the crowd, her hand never far from her belly. She saw Sebastian across the infinity pool, locked in conversation with Blake and Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was dazzling in a crimson dress that seemed to defy gravity. She laughed at something Sebastian said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. Haley had seen that gesture 100 times, a casual mark of territory that set her teeth on edge. She told herself it was just the paranoia of pregnancy. She turned to greet a senator from New York, discussing a recent museum gala when she felt a presence behind her. "You're glowing," Victoria purred, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Pregnancy suits you. It's so domestic." Haley forced a smile. "Thank you, Victoria. I see you're enjoying the party." "Oh, it's a Sebastian Devereaux party." "They're always legendary," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Haley from head to toe. "That's a lovely color on you. Did Sebastian pick it out?" He always had such specific tastes. The implication was clear. Another subtle jab to remind Haley of her place. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from across the sea. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds and making the paper lanterns dance violently. The sky, once a canvas of pastel sunset hues, was now a bruised purple. "Looks like we're in for a show," Victoria said with a smirk, seemingly unbothered. An hour later, the show began. The storm hit not with a gentle prelude, but with a sudden, furious onslaught. Rain came down in blinding sheets, driving the guests from the exposed terraces into the cavernous main hall of the Overlook. The string quartet was replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive crash of waves against the cliffs below. The lights flickered, casting the panicked faces of the elite in a strobe-like effect. In the ensuing chaos, Haley searched for Sebastian. She found him near the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking utterly calm. He was with Victoria again. Blake was nowhere to be seen. "Seb, the staff is trying to get everyone to the storm shelters in the guest villas." Haley said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We should coordinate," he cut her off. his eyes cold and distant. "Everything is under control, Haley. Go and rest. You look pale." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Hurt and confused, she began to walk away, but his next words stopped her dead. "She knows, Vic. It's time." The words were a low murmur, but in a sudden lull in the storm's fury, they carried across the marble floor with perfect, devastating clarity. Haley turned back slowly. Victoria was looking at her, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "Knows what Seb?" Haley asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What's going on?" Sebastian sighed, a theatrical sound of weary impatience. He took a step forward, and the small crowd that had been huddled nearby fell silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The drama of the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the walls of the Overlook. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between himself and Haley. "This arrangement, it has run its course." Haley's blood ran cold. "Arrangement? You mean our marriage?" "I mean, the charade." He corrected his voice, rising, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He was performing now. This was his stage. I needed a certain image for the Ethelred deal. A stable, traditional man. You played that part beautifully, I'll admit. A collective gasp went through the audience of his peers. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Haley felt her face flush with heat, 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her humiliation. "The deal is done." Sebastian continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My company is secure, and I no longer require the props." "Props." Her voice was a choked whisper. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the life inside her. "Is that what your son is to you? A prop?" Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "My son? Oh, Haley, you are delightfully naive. I have my lawyers the best in the world. They've raised some very interesting questions about the timeline of your pregnancy, about your fidelity." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a lie, a monstrous, baseless lie. But he said it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the onlookers. He was poisoning the well, destroying her reputation to ensure his own clean getaway. "That's not true," she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You know that's not true." "Does it matter?" he shot back. "I'm Sebastian Devereux. My truth is the one that gets printed." He then turned and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to his side. He held her hand up for all to see. "Victoria and I are going to be together. It's been a long time coming. She understands my world. She belongs in it." Victoria looked at Haley, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had won. "You will be given a severance," Sebastian said, as if firing a disloyal employee. "Generous, of course. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear quietly. My jet will take you back to the mainland in the morning after the storm passes. The staff will show you to a guest room." He turned his back on her, a final, brutal act of dismissal. He had just executed her socially and emotionally in front of the most powerful people he knew. Stranded pregnant and publicly branded an unfaithful, disposable wife, Haley stood frozen in the center of the room. The lights flickered again, and then died, completely plunging the hall into darkness, save for the frantic beams of staff flashlights and the periodic, terrifying flashes of lightning from outside. In that moment of absolute darkness, a tear finally escaped, and traced a path down her cheek. It felt as hot as acid. The gilded cage hadn't just opened. It had been vaporized, and she was left falling with no ground in sight. The darkness was a perverse mercy. It hid the smirks, the pitying glances, the avid curiosity on the faces of the guests. A member of the staff, a young woman named Sophia, whose kindness had always seemed genuine, gently touched Haley's arm. "Ma'am, let me take you to your room. It's not safe here." Haley allowed herself to be led away, moving like a sleepwalker through the opulent halls that now felt like a mausoleum. The room they took her to was not her own. It was a sterile, impersonal guest suite at the far end of the estate, as far from Sebastian as possible. Sophia lit some candles, her expression full of a sorrow she couldn't voice. "Is there anything I can get you?" "Mrs. Devereux." The name was a slap. "Don't call me that," Haley whispered, her voice raw. "My name is Haley McClellan." Reclaiming her maiden name was the first act of defiance, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Sophia nodded and quietly left, closing the door behind her. Haley was alone with the roaring storm and the ruins of her life. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was terrified. Sebastian's lie about her fidelity wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a strategic move to disown their child, to absolve himself of all responsibility, to paint her as a gold-digging fraud. He controlled the media, the lawyers, the narrative. If she stayed, she'd be trapped in a public relations war she couldn't possibly win. He would crush her. She and her child would be footnotes in the story of his glorious rise, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She couldn't let that happen. Her child deserved more than a life lived in the shadow of Sebastian's lies. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form. Disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. He expected her to take his severance and slink away broken. He would never expect her to simply cease to exist. The storm was her cover. The chaos was her opportunity. Driven by a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, Haley stood up. She couldn't take anything that belonged to him. Not the designer clothes in the closet, not the jewels in the safe. She took off the 7-carat diamond ring he'd placed on her finger and set it on the nightstand. It felt like removing a shackle. She was wearing only the seafoam green gown, now damp and stained. It would have to do. She went to the window. It overlooked a steep garden path that led down towards a small private cove, one rarely used by guests. The rain was relentless, turning the manicured landscape into a treacherous river of mud. It was dangerous, but staying was a death sentence of a different kind. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out of the villa. The wind tore at her, plastering the thin fabric of her dress to her body. She was instantly soaked to the bone. Her hair whipped across her face, blinding her. She half ran, half slid down the muddy path, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to keep from falling. Thorns tore at her dress and her skin. The perfect paradise had become a hostile wilderness. She reached the cove. The waves were monstrous, crashing against the rocks with a terrifying power. A small boat dock used for jet skis and tenders was being battered by the surf. Tied to it was a small inflatable Zodiac boat, its motor covered with a tarp probably left by a maintenance worker who had fled for shelter. It was her only chance. Her fingers were numb with cold as she struggled with the ropes. A massive wave crashed over the dock, nearly sweeping her off her feet. She clung to a piling her knuckles white. The baby felt like a lead weight in her belly. "We can do this," she thought, a mantra against the screaming wind. "We have to do this." Finally, the last knot gave way. She clambered into the Zodiac, her body screaming with protest. She fumbled with the tarp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She pulled the cord on the small outboard motor. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Panic began to set in. On the third pull, a wave of desperation lending her strength. The motor sputtered to life with a choked cough. She steered the small boat away from the island into the churning Black Sea. It was an act of insanity. The Zodiac was tossed about like a toy, cresting massive waves that threatened to swallow it whole. Salt spray stung her eyes, and the roar of the engine was lost in the fury of the storm. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from Sebastian, away from the life that had tried to destroy her. She didn't know how long she fought the storm. It could have been minutes or hours. Her arms ached, her body was bruised, and a chilling exhaustion was seeping into her bones. The lights of Calivigny Island were long gone. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in a world of violent water and wind. Just as she felt her strength give out, as the engine sputtered and died, a light cut through the rain. It was a beam, powerful and steady, sweeping across the waves. It found her. The beam belonged to a larger vessel, a sturdy-looking yacht that was riding out the storm in the lee of a neighboring smaller island. Men were shouting. A rope ladder was thrown down. Strong hands pulled her from the half-swamped Zodiac onto the deck of the yacht. She collapsed, shivering and incoherent, into the arms of a figure who wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She looked up into the face of an old man, with kind, concerned eyes and a shock of white hair. He was a guest from the party she vaguely recalled, an investor from a bygone era, one who had watched the evening's drama unfold with a quiet, thoughtful detachment. "You're safe now, my dear," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "My name is Desmond Wallace, and I think it's fair to say your life has just taken a rather dramatic turn. Let's get you warm, and then we can decide what comes next." As she slipped into an exhausted unconsciousness, Hayley McClellan knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, drowned in the storm. A new one, terrifying and unknown, had just begun. The next 5 years were a lifetime. Hayley awoke on Desmond Wallace's yacht, the Wanderer. Not as a victim, but as a blank slate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sea as calm as glass. Calivigny Island was a distant smudge on the horizon, a place she vowed never to see again, not as she was. Desmond Wallace was more than just a kind stranger. He was a legend in the world of old money and discreet power. A self-made shipping magnate who had cashed out decades ago, he had watched men like Sebastian Devereux, arrogant, flashy, and ultimately hollow, rise and fall like the tides. He had seen the cruelty at the party, and in Hayley he saw not a broken woman, but a core of tempered steel she didn't yet know she possessed. He made a grave error, Hayley Desmond told her over a cup of tea in his yacht's study. A room panelled in rich mahogany and lined with books. He underestimated you. Men like Devereux always do. They see a beautiful wife, not a brilliant partner. Their ego is their Achilles' heel. He offered her a choice. He could arrange for her to be safely and anonymously returned to the United States with a small trust fund to start over. Or she could stay with him, learn from him, and forge a new identity, a new life on her own terms. Revenge is a fool's game. He said, his gaze steady. But justice is the business of building a better future on the wreckage of the past. He tried to erase you. The greatest justice it is not to haunt him, but to become someone he could never imagine. Haley chose the latter. Her son was born 3 months later in a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. She named him Leo, for the lion-hearted courage he had given her. Holding him for the first time, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was building a dynasty for him, a legacy free from the taint of the Devereaux name. Under Desmond's tutelage, Haley McClellan ceased to exist. In her place emerged Haley Monroe, a name chosen for its classic strength. She devoured Desmond's library, learning about global finance, sovereign debt, emerging markets, and corporate law. She had a natural aptitude for seeing patterns, a skill honed during her years studying art history, and she applied it to the complex tapestry of the financial world. Desmond treated her like the daughter he never had. He taught her how to negotiate with sharks, how to leverage debt, how to create shell corporations and offshore accounts, not for evasion, but for protection and strategic advantage. He refined her, sharpening her intellect until it was a weapon. She learned 4 languages. She traveled with him on the Wanderer, sitting in on meetings in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Monaco, a silent observer who absorbed everything. Leo grew up on the yacht, his world a shifting landscape of international ports and the unwavering love of his mother. He had her thoughtful eyes, and to Haley's secret, painful acknowledgement, Sebastian's determined chin. He was smart, resilient, and knew nothing of the father who had disowned him. His father, in every way that mattered, was the kind old man who taught him how to fish off the coast of Greece and read him stories about great explorers. When Leo was 4, Desmond's health began to fail. He had lived a full life and was ready for its final chapter. One afternoon, anchored off the coast of Croatia, he called Haley to his study. "I'm not leaving you a fortune, my dear," he said, his voice weaker now, but still clear. "I'm leaving you an arsenal. The companies, the accounts, the contacts, they are all tools. What you build with them is up to you." He passed away a week later, peacefully in his sleep. His will was simple. The bulk of his vast, labyrinthine estate was left to a charitable foundation, but a significant, strategically chosen portfolio of assets, worth nearly $1 billion if managed correctly, was left to one Haley Monroe. Along with it was a single sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter. "My dearest Haley, I hope I have given you the means to secure your and Leo's future. But I know you. You have a fire in you that peace alone will not quench. There is one piece of unfinished business. I have learned through my network that Sebastian Devereaux is selling Calivigny Island. His tech empire is over-leveraged, and he needs liquid capital. He sees the island as a monument to a past triumph. I see it as a stage. Go and claim it. Not for revenge, but to prove once and for all that the future is not written by the men who build gilded cages, but by the women who learn to fly out of them. Your friend Desmond." Reading the letter, Haley felt a chill run down her spine. The island, the site of her greatest humiliation. For 5 years, she had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, focusing only on the future. But Desmond was right. To truly be free, she had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the ghost of her past. She looked at the financial reports Desmond had left her. She saw the network of holding companies, the web of assets. She began to formulate a plan, not with the desperation of an escaped victim, but with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate raider. Sebastian Devereux thought he had destroyed Haley McClellan 5 years ago in a storm. He had no idea that he had inadvertently forged Haley Monroe in the crucible of his own cruelty. And she was coming back to collect. The sale of Calavigny Island was not a public affair. It was a quiet, discreet offering circulated among the world's ultra-elite through a handful of exclusive brokerage firms in Zurich and London. Sebastian Devereux, true to form, couldn't bear the public humiliation of a fire sale. The official narrative was that he was realigning his portfolio to focus on new philanthropic ventures. It was a lie, and everyone in his circle knew it. His tech company, Ethelred, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was hemorrhaging money. A series of disastrous product launches and a nasty patent lawsuit had eroded investor confidence. The stock was in a death spiral. Sebastian and Victoria's lavish lifestyle, once funded by soaring profits, was now financed by debt. The island was his most liquid, most valuable, non-corporate asset. He needed to sell, and he needed to sell fast. From a quiet, modern office in Geneva, Haley Monroe orchestrated her attack. She was no longer a woman in a seafoam green dress. She was a spectre in the machine, a name on a letterhead that no one could trace back to the wife Sebastian had discarded. She operated through 3 different shell corporations, registered in 3 different countries. A real estate holding firm in the Cayman Islands, a financial services company in Luxembourg, and a consulting group in Delaware. Each was a cutout, a layer of insulation between her and the final transaction. Her lead negotiator was a shrewd, silver-haired Swiss lawyer named Anton Gruber, a man who had been fiercely loyal to Desmond Wallace for 40 years. He never asked about his new client's motives. He only executed her instructions with brutal efficiency. Sebastian's asking price was $150 million. It was inflated based on what he had spent on it, not its current market value. He's sentimental, and he's desperate, Haley told Anton over a secure video call. His ego won't let him accept a low-ball offer, so we won't make one. We will make him feel like he's winning right up until the end. Their first move was to create a competitor. Haley used the Delaware Corporation to put in a deliberately clumsy low offer of $90 million, leaking it to a financial gossip blog. The story framed it as an insult, a sign of Devereux's fallen status. Sebastian, predictably, was enraged. He publicly rejected the offer, his pride forcing him to hold firm on his price. That was when Anton Gruber, representing the Luxembourg firm Orion Capital, entered the picture. He approached Sebastian's brokers with a much more serious offer of $125 million. He was professional, courteous, and projected an air of immense old-world wealth. After the insult of the first bid, Sebastian saw Orion Capital as a serious, respectable buyer. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Sebastian, squeezed by his creditors, pushed for a higher price. Haley, through Anton, held firm. She knew Sebastian's quarterly earnings report was due to be released, and she had done her homework. It was going to be a bloodbath. The day the disastrous report was published, Ethelred's stock plunged another 30%. Sebastian's bankers were calling. The pressure was immense. That same afternoon, Anton received a call. Sebastian would accept the $125 million, but he had one condition: a fast, all-cash closing in under a week, with no contingencies. It was a move designed to weed out anyone who didn't have immediate access to that kind of capital. "He is testing us," Anton told Haley. "He believes no one can move that quickly." "He's right," Haley said with a thin smile. "No one can. But we can." She initiated a complex series of wire transfers, moving funds from various accounts Desmond had left, her routing them through the Cayman Islands holding company, and finally consolidating them in an escrow account managed by Orion Capital in Zurich. It was a symphony of international finance, conducted flawlessly. 5 days later, the deal was ready to close. The final contracts were to be signed. The buyer was listed as Kalivikni Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Orion Capital. The signatory for the buyer was Anton Gruber. Haley's name was nowhere on the documents. From her office in Geneva, she watched a live feed from the closing room in Zurich. She saw Sebastian Devereux on the screen, looking older and more strained than she remembered. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle facade. Victoria was not with him. He signed the documents with a flourish of his pen, a man trying to pretend he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. Once his signature was on the page, Anton signed for the buyer. A lawyer nodded. The deal was done. The island was hers. Haley felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound quiet and deeply satisfying sense of completion. It was a transaction. A problem had been solved. A debt had been settled. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at Lake Geneva. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to prepare the stage. She picked up her phone and dialed her new estate manager, a woman hand-picked for her discretion and impeccable taste. "Good morning, Catherine Haley," said her voice, calm and steady. "We can now begin the renovations on the island. I have the guest list for the grand reopening party. I want the invitations sent out by the end of the week. Oh, and Catherine. The new owner wishes to remain anonymous for now. All correspondence should be from GM Enterprises." She hung up the phone. GM Haley Monroe, a name Sebastian Devereux would not recognize. But soon he would. He and everyone else who had watched her fall would be invited back to the scene of the crime. Only this time she wouldn't be the spectacle. She would be the architect. The invitation arrived in a world that had moved on. 5 years is an eternity in the sphere of the ultra-rich. Fortunes are made. Empires crumble. Alliances shift. For Sebastian and Victoria Devereux, the past 5 years had been a slow, grinding descent. The sale of the island had provided a temporary reprieve, but it was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. Ethelred was a shadow of its former self, propped up by risky loans and the sheer force of Sebastian's denial. Their social standing, once unassailable, had become precarious. They were no longer the power couple everyone clamored to be near. They were the couple people whispered about their troubles a source of delicious gossip. Their marriage, born of ambition and betrayal, had curdled into a partnership of mutual resentment, held together only by a shared fear of losing their status. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a private courier. It was a heavy, cream-colored card, thick as a book cover, with minimalist, embossed gold lettering. There was no gaudy crest, no ostentatious design. Its power lay in its understated elegance. GM Enterprises cordially invites you to celebrate the reawakening of Kalivikni Island. A weekend of tranquility and new beginnings. The date was set for a month away. The details were sparse, promising private jet transport from select global capitals and an experience of unparalleled bespoke luxury. The host was identified only as the island's new anonymous owner. Victoria, her face a carefully maintained mask of cosmetic enhancements, turned the card over in her hands. GM. Enterprises, who the hell is that? Must be some new Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince. Tacky to be so mysterious. Sebastian, however, felt a flicker of something else. Not excitement, but a gnawing curiosity mixed with the bitter tang of loss. Everyone is talking about it, he said, scrolling through his phone. The entire guest list from that night. They all got at one. It's a power play. The new owner is making a statement inviting the old king's court to see the new regime. So we're not going, Victoria stated flatly. The island held nothing but sour memories for her, now a monument to a victory that had ultimately felt hollow. We have to go, Sebastian countered, his voice sharp. Not going would be an admission of defeat. It would be telling the world that we can't stand to see someone else own our old property. It would be weak. We will go, we will smile, we will praise the new owner's taste, and we will act as if selling that rock was the smartest decision we ever made. We have to maintain appearances, Victoria. It's all we have left. And so they accepted, as did everyone else. The mystery was too tantalizing to ignore. For the next month, the sole topic of conversation in their elite circles was the identity of GM. On the appointed day, Sebastian and Victoria boarded a chartered jet, a far cry from their old G650. The other passengers were familiar faces from their past, the same hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls. But the atmosphere was different. The fawning respect they once commanded was gone, replaced by a polite, cool distance. They were no longer the sun around which these people orbited. They were just two more guests. As the jet descended towards the familiar airstrip, Sebastian felt a pit in his stomach. The island looked different, more lush. The main residence, the overlook, had been subtly altered. The stark modernist lines he had favored were softened by cascades of vibrant bougainvillea. The architecture was the same, but the soul of the place felt new. They were greeted not by staff in starchy formal uniforms, but by hosts in elegant flowing linen. The atmosphere was not one of opulent servitude, but of relaxed, confident hospitality. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi, but the sophisticated ambient tones of a modern electronic composer. Their bags were whisked away to their suite, a guest villa not the owner's residence they had once occupied. It was the very same suite where Haley had been sent after her public humiliation. The irony was so thick it was suffocating, though Sebastian was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, the welcome reception was held on the main terrace. It mirrored the party from 5 years ago, yet it was an inversion of it. The garish ice sculpture was gone, replaced by a stunning piece of modern art. The food was not a buffet of excess, but a curated selection of exquisite, locally sourced tapas. Everything was better, more tasteful, more confident, more powerful. Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the work of some new money brute. This was the work of someone with impeccable taste and a deep understanding of psychology. Someone who knew exactly what this place once represented and was systematically dismantling it. He and Victoria mingled, putting on their brave faces, but the whispers were everywhere. Who is GM? Have you seen the new art collection? I heard they bought the island for cash, no financing. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests, a woman, the estate manager Catherine, stepped onto a small, discreet stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome," she said, her voice amplified just enough to be heard over the gentle music. On behalf of our host, we are so thrilled you could join us for this special weekend. In a few moments, the owner of this island, the visionary behind GM Enterprises, would like to say a few words. A buzz of anticipation went through the crowd. Everyone craned their necks, looking towards the main entrance of the villa. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. He needed to see the person who had done this, the person who had bought his past and so effortlessly improved upon it. The music softened. The lights on the terrace dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the empty stage. The moment was pregnant with expectation, and from the shadows of the grand archway, a figure emerged. A woman. She was tall and poised, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut evening gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. It was a face sculpted by strength, intelligence, and an unshakable, chilling calm. A collective audible gasp rippled through the guests. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone terrace. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stopped. He was looking at a ghost. But she was not a ghost. She was real. It was Haley. She walked to the center of the stage, her movements possessing a liquid grace that was utterly captivating. The sapphire dress, a column of midnight silk, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making her the undeniable focal point of the entire terrace. She didn't look angry or triumphant or vengeful. She looked serene, a queen, taking her place on her throne not by conquest but by divine right. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back radiating a confidence that was so absolute it felt like a physical force. This was not the gentle, accommodating Haley they remembered. This was a woman forged in a fire they couldn't possibly comprehend. A staff member offered her a microphone, but she waited a long, deliberate moment before taking it, letting the silence and the crushing weight of the crowd's shock settle over the terrace. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the sea of stunned, upturned faces. They passed over tech moguls who had once ignored her and socialites who had whispered about her. Finally, her gaze landed on Sebastian and Victoria. She held their stare for a single protracted heartbeat, a moment stretched into an eternity. In that silent, chilling acknowledgement, they knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. This was an appointment, an execution meticulously planned and 5 years in the making. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Beside her, Sebastian stood utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief carved from ice. The man who always had a plan, always had an angle, was completely, terrifyingly adrift. His mind, usually a supersonic calculator of risk and opportunity, was blank with static. Impossible. It's not her. It's a trick, a ghost. But his heart, hammering against his ribs, knew the truth. "Welcome back to Calavigny Island," Haley finally said. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant tone he remembered. It was richer, deeper, and resonated with an unshakable authority that commanded the attention of every person present. "I see some familiar faces. It's been 5 years. A great deal can change in 5 years." She paused, allowing the profound understatement to land with the force of a physical blow. The whispers began to erupt, a panicked, sibilant sound like dry leaves, skittering across pavement. "It's her. My God. It's actually her. How is this possible? Where did she get the money?" Sebastian could feel the collective gaze of the crowd, shift flickering between the woman on the stage and him. He was no longer a guest. He was part of the spectacle. The other half of a story, whose ending he had written long ago only to find the protagonist had returned to pen a final, brutal chapter. "Some of you may remember me," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of supreme, untouchable control, though perhaps in a different context. "The last time we were all gathered here on a rather stormy evening, I was the wife of the host. Tonight, she let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool. I am simply the host." The implication was a thunderclap. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. The wineglass, forgotten in her hand, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter on the stone terrace. It landed on the manicured lawn, just beside it, with a dull, muffled thud, a sound of anticlimax that was somehow more unnerving than a crash. "I understand there is some curiosity," Haley said, her voice smoothly overriding the rising clamor. "Let me be clear. This weekend is not about dwelling on the past. It is about building the future. It is about celebrating new beginnings." Her eyes swept the horizon towards the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. This island, once a symbol of brittle, fleeting power, a monument to an ego, is being reborn. It will now be the headquarters for my foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to supporting emerging artists and entrepreneurs who value creativity over currency. She was rewriting history, erasing his legacy with a few effortless sentences and replacing it with her own nobler vision. Every word was a calculated demolition of the world he had built. He had used the island to project strength. She was using it to project purpose. The comparison was devastating, and he could feel the judgment of his peers turning on him. However, she added, and her tone shifted, the philanthropic warmth evaporating, replaced by the chilling precision of a boardroom executioner. New beginnings sometimes require the clearing of old debts, and in the world of business, as we all know, all debts must eventually be paid. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Sebastian's. He felt pinned by her gaze, a specimen under a microscope. For instance, Haley said, her voice now a clinical, dispassionate instrument. "Some of you here tonight are investors in a company called Ethelred. My advice as a courtesy from your host would be to divest immediately. Their recent financing, the series of high-risk loans that have been keeping them afloat for the past 6 months, were not from a traditional banking institution. They were extended by a private equity firm, a rather aggressive firm named Orion Capital." A new wave of murmurs, this time laced with genuine financial panic, rippled through the guests. Several people, no longer trying to be discreet, pulled out their phones and began typing furiously. The name Orion Capital meant nothing to them, but the warning from the woman who clearly held all the cards was enough. But to Sebastian, the name was a death knell. Orion Capital was his lifeline, his secret savior, the anonymous entity that had given him the capital to stave off ruin. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in his stomach as he began to connect the impossible dots. Haley let him squirm in that silent horror for a moment before continuing. Orion Capital, as of last week, was acquired in a rather swift, hostile takeover by my own holding company, which means, Sebastian, that the 9-figure debt you thought you owed to a stranger, you now owe to me. The crowd gasped as one. This was beyond revenge. This was a strategic masterwork of such breathtaking cruelty that it bordered on art. "I'm calling in the loan," she stated as simply as if she were ordering a coffee. "All of it. The covenants in your agreement are rather strict, as desperate men tend to overlook the fine print. I believe the default clause can be triggered by me at my sole discretion, and I am exercising that discretion. Effective tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Zurich time, your company will be in receivership. My people will be at your offices to oversee the liquidation." Sebastian actually staggered a step back, his hand flying to a nearby pillar for support. This was it. The end. Not just failure, but total annihilation delivered publicly by the woman he had tried to erase. Haley's gaze then shifted with chilling nonchalance to Victoria. And Victoria, your new lifestyle brand, a noble effort to remain relevant. Unfortunately, your primary seed investor, a small venture capital fund called Beaumont Ventures, has also just been acquired by a subsidiary of GM Enterprises. We will be re-evaluating all current investments, and I'm afraid a vanity project with no discernible path to profitability does not align with our portfolio strategy. Your funding will be terminated effective immediately. If Sebastian's ruin was a cannon blast, Victoria's was the silent, deadly slice of a stiletto. Her carefully constructed world of influence and appearances evaporated in an instant. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask of shock and hatred. Having delivered her financial death blows, Haley's expression softened, but it was a change that brought no comfort. It was the prelude to the final, most personal devastation. But as I said, she repeated her voice now imbued with a quiet power. Tonight is about the future. From the shadows at the side of the stage, a door to the main residence opened. The estate manager, Catherine, emerged holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 5. He was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked with a child's unself-conscious curiosity, his eyes taking in the strange crowd. He walked straight to Haley, who knelt down, her entire being softening as she wrapped a protective arm around him. "I would like you all to meet the true owner of this island's future," she said, her voice thick with a love that was a tangible, fiercely protective force. "This is my son, Leo." Leo looked out at the crowd, his gaze unafraid. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes, but everything else, the dark, unruly hair, the strong set of his jaw, the determined shape of his chin, was pure, undiluted Devereaux. He was the spitting image of a younger, uncorrupted Sebastian. The paternity he had so publicly and callously questioned 5 years ago was now presented as irrefutable evidence to the very same jury that had witnessed his crime. The silence on the terrace was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. The social and emotional checkmate was complete. Every lie Sebastian had ever told about her, about their child, was laid bare for all to see. Haley stood up, holding her son's hand firmly in hers. She didn't spare another glance for the wreckage she had wrought. She didn't need to gloat or scream. Her victory was in her calm, in her control, in the simple, undeniable fact that she was standing there, whole and powerful with her son by her side. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and there was nothing in her eyes. Not hatred, not pity, not even the memory of love. It was the flat, dismissive look one gives to a piece of furniture, to something utterly irrelevant that is about to be removed. "Enjoy the party," she said to the assembled guests, her voice once again the gracious host. Then she turned her back on her former husband, on the woman who had replaced her, and on the entire life that had almost destroyed her. She walked off the stage with her son disappearing back into the magnificent home that was now hers, leaving everyone else standing in the beautiful, perfect, and utterly ruthless world she had created. The party's ambient music swelled to fill the silence, but it couldn't hide the sound of a world ending for the two figures left standing alone in the center of it all. That night, Haley Monroe didn't just reclaim her name. She forged a new legend. Her story became a whisper, then a roar in the circles of the powerful, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the castles you build, but the ashes you rise from. She transformed Kalavinni Island from a monument of ego into a beacon of hope, proving that the deepest betrayals can fuel the most incredible transformations. Her revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, undeniable hum of a new empire being built upon the foundations of an old one's collapse. She became the architect of her own destiny, the queen of her own island, and a mother who showed her son that a person's worth is not determined by who tried to break them, but by how they choose to rebuild. What did you think of Haley's ultimate comeback? Was her justice served cold, or was it just right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a moment where you had to rise from the ashes, share your story of strength. We are inspired by resilience. For more stories of incredible twists and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to you.